So are you on Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge list? And how would you know? I mean, what does Ferguson do to people who actually get on his list? Well, in today's video, we're going to discuss this serious topic, as weird as it is, and let's face it, weird people in power often do strange and weird things. However, as we kind of peel back the hidden layers of corruption and bad behavior in local government, the truth is strange, sometimes ugly. But in the end, we'll need to decide what free people must do when their governing class is just so clearly out of control. But before we get to Bob Ferguson's weird Black Book of Revenge, I just want to remind everyone watching this video to subscribe, share, and like this video. Make sure to mark the notification always button if you want to see all our videos as we launch them. And please feel free to share these videos with others who might appreciate the content. And this is all free to you, and it only costs a few seconds of your time. But it does have an impact on our channel, and it actually tends to help more people see what is often shadow banned and forbidden content. Now, if you're a huge fan and you want to support my efforts on this channel and the other work I do, you can go to my website down below at We the Governed. I have that link there, and you can support us that way as well. Everything is greatly appreciated. Now, not surprisingly, our political class would prefer that you be ignorant of these topics, so share them far and wide if you can. So back to Ferguson and his Black Book of Revenge. Now, before Bob Ferguson was elected Attorney General of Washington State in 2012, he was actually on the King County Council for many years. And that was his political training ground for statewide office. And one of his fellow King County Council members saw him writing in a black book, and they asked him what he was writing. And he said that he was writing the names of everyone who had wronged him in the past so that he could have his revenge on them in the future. Now, I guess the list was so long, Bob Ferguson was concerned he'd forget. So he reportedly made a comment at that time saying that his mother, Bob Ferguson's mother, told him that he shouldn't have more than 5 names in that book. But he obviously was ignoring her advice. Now, according to this former King County Council member, they asked Ferguson if he might consider not keeping the list at all. Now, that was a great question, and one which Ferguson chose to ignore. To some extent, obviously, Bob Ferguson doesn't really care that people know about his Black Book of Revenge and the list that he keeps. In some ways, to the political establishment and political insiders, I'm sure, this is a type of political intimidation. But the more power Ferguson is able to obtain, the more capable he becomes at extracting his revenge against those who have theoretically wronged him in the past. Now, I know what you're thinking, and yes, being the good activist that I am, I have, of course, filed a public records request for Bob Ferguson's revenge list. Since most of his enemies are presumably political in nature and a result of his political ambitions, this list is germane to how he actually conducts his political activities, and the public certainly has a right to know. It seems almost certain that he's going to lie, of course, and pretend he doesn't have a list like this, or that it no longer exists. We'll see. And I'll share the Attorney General's response to my records request when I get it. But regardless of how much he might lie about the list, this explains a good deal about Ferguson's approach to political power. And it explains some of his more abusive behaviors over the past few years. Now, I know what you're thinking. Am I on that list? Of course I am. I mean, listen, I've annoyed this guy in many ways over the years, so the only question is how high on the list I actually am right now. And listen, if it wasn't my public disclosure complaint that I filed against him back in 2017, just before Christmas that year, I mean, that was for his many campaign finance violations at the time, and I've linked to it down below. But clearly I caught him breaking the Washington State's campaign finance laws at the time, RCW 4217A for those who are interested. And I was able to obtain standing to actually sue Ferguson under the citizen action notice process that existed at that time. However, I was unable to find an attorney, anybody actually, who was willing to take on this case at the time, probably because they didn't want to get into Ferguson's well-known Black Book of Revenge. And I eventually lost standing in that case when Governor Inslee signed the Stop Glenn Morgan bill in 2018. Now again, I've linked to that story down below as well, and Ferguson just got off with a quick reminder, naughty letter from the Public Disclosure Commission at the time. And you can read it yourself in the case file that I've linked below. Now, as if that wasn't enough for me to get on Ferguson's black list of revenge, just look at many of my videos and articles that I've written about his bad behavior and actions over the years. On top of that, I also forced him, against his will, to file 19 different lawsuits against Democrat Party organizations, and everyone from Democrat Speaker Frank Chopp, Union PAC, Senator Sam Hunt, and many other Bob Ferguson allies and donors at the time, all of them for violating the campaign finance laws of Washington State. Now, keep in mind, Ferguson had been putting out press releases up until then, holding elaborate press conferences about the campaign finance lawsuits that he was waging against the initiative guy, Tim Eyman, or the former Republican Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, timed to cause maximum harm during her election at the time, and other Republican-leaning groups who also made Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge. Because I used the law as it was written at the time to actually force him to sue his friends who were violating the law every bit as much, if not more, than his chosen targets at the time, he was not happy with me. In fact, at the time, one of his attorneys quit because he didn't actually join the AG's office to sue Democrats, he said. Now, yeah, sure, Bob Ferguson wasn't happy, and he obviously gave his political friends a pass. I mean, he made as many quick friend settlements with his donors, and he certainly didn't investigate them the same way that he's legally tortured Tim Eyman or others in the state when Bob Ferguson uses his office to persecute them. But he was pretty angry with me at the time for doing this. So yes, I'm definitely in Bob Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge, and I'd like to see who else has made it to that list. We may never know for sure, but we can get some idea based on Ferguson's actions in office. And now listen, not everything at all right now has gone according to Bob Ferguson's plans. Now remember, he gets a lot of mileage claiming that he's some type of genius chess player, but it isn't always annoying conservative activists who actually rain on his political parade. Inslee has probably made Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge in the past. When Washington State Governor Inslee jumped back into the governor's race, Inslee's unexpected third time at bat in 2020, Inslee at the time, we all remember, he failed miserably in his aborted and embarrassing effort to run for president. So he kind of muscled back into the Washington State for a third-term governor race in 2020. And remember, Bob Ferguson, he'd already declared at the time and had raised a ton of cash already. So Inslee put the political squeeze on Ferguson. And then Ferguson was forced to bow out of the governor's race and went back for his consolation prize with a third term as Washington State Attorney General. Now, when Jay Inslee forced AG Bob Ferguson and King County Executive Dow Constantine to stand next to him in 2022, pictured here actually, this wasn't a bunch of friends on stage. I mean, this was the political equivalent of a hostage video, and Ferguson didn't like playing his part. But he added more names to his Black Book of Revenge, and he probably made plans for 2024. So now, once again, we're hearing rumors Inslee's unwanted in D.C. In a city full of political clowns. They really don't need another. So Inslee's spreading the word right now that he's thinking about running again, and Ferguson is not happy. Ferguson is, in response, indicating that he might be willing to go toe-to-toe against Inslee in a primary. Now, if this behind-the-scenes drama continues, it actually could get very ugly. So meanwhile, back to the real world where the rest of us watch the circus show unfold in Olympia in disgust and frustration, we're also noticing that Bob Ferguson has suffered a political defeat, even if only temporarily in the state legislature. His signature effort to push his Orwellian Ministry of Truth, we did a video on this a little while ago, he had this program with encouragement from the Biden administration, that's actually stalled and probably won't happen this year. This bill, which was HB 1333, was buried back in the Rules Committee again, and it's most likely dead for 2023. Now, it could come up next year, but in addition to getting a lot of opposition and national mockery from around the nation, it might very well be a casualty of the infighting right now that's happening inside the Democratic Party. On top of this, even the Washington State Supreme Court, which is shocking, appears to be getting tired of Ferguson's endless kind of ego-based shakedown operation that he keeps using his 600 attorneys at the AG's office to launch. For example, the Washington State Supreme Court, which has largely just become a political rubber stamp for the most extreme leftist causes, regardless of what the federal or state constitution actually says. However, in a 9-0 ruling just last month, they tossed out Inslee's effort, Ferguson's effort mainly, to shake down Value Village by distorting Washington State's consumer protection laws beyond all recognition. Now, this rebuke of Ferguson's signature shakedown effort is actually very significant. It can't be understated. And I'm not sure that Ferguson has placed all 9 of the state Supreme Court justices in his Black Book of Revenge, but they might be getting close. Now, of course, we should remember most of them began their judicial career as appointees of Inslee or previous governors. Now, obviously, if you care about freedom, liberty, and the rule of law, this is entirely a disturbing story. And it's not a good thing that we have a psychotic, hyper-partisan, revenge-oriented crazy guy in the highest position of law enforcement power in this state. It's not a good thing. Ferguson can inflict great harm on just regular people from that position. And those of us out here who are just the little people have very small chances of prevailing against just this awesome power of the state that Ferguson so carelessly launches against us regularly. I mean, just look at Initiative Guy Tim Imond. I mean, there is nothing proportionate, normal, or honest about that case at all. However, I believe that people are waking up to the terrible choices our state has made, putting crazies and clowns into political office in our state. And I realize that the traditional media will cover up for them. Sure, I mean, of course they do. After all, if they don't, they might get added to Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge too. However, even former allies, they can get tired of the abuse and the fear. Even former political friends, and let's face it, most friendships in the political world, they're temporary until they're no longer convenient. Even these people, they'll tend to abandon their alliances when it gets ugly enough. Now, I suspect people are waking up. How many? Well, that's hard to say. Is it enough yet to make real change? I really don't know yet. But frankly, there is frustration, and there's a clear trend out there against the endless political fiascos that we're witnessing almost daily in our state, not to mention the federal ones. So the out-of-state escalating crime wave, for example, that's encouraged and supported by the current political class. That's creating more and more distrust of government every day. The complete and open failure of the public education system is certainly waking up parents. Now, the endless failed promises, the repeat effort to cover up their absurd failures, and the impact of everything on just regular people, that's eventually going to create the change that our political elite are currently resisting. And pretty soon, most people will just stop being fearful about ending up in Bob Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge. So until that time, let me just close with a few suggestions for what you can do to make a difference. Now, number one, just don't be fearful and cower in the corner. You can't change anything if you try to hide or run away. The fight for freedom and liberty, that's now, and it is worthwhile to engage. Do it thoughtfully and without fear. Number two, just share the truth with everyone. If they don't know the truth, they certainly can't help you. Finally, work well with others. You're not alone. Find others who share your concerns. Organize on the topics you care about because, in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.